Hello, my name's Ian Kinder, and I'm the owner and the founder of Live Safe Academy. I'm here today with Lou Chiodo for episode number 8 of Real Encounters. This is a video series where we take footage of actual accounts, actual events, actual encounters that are violent, or where people's lives are in danger, where they're being attacked. And then we come back and we talk about ways that people could be safe if they find themselves in the same type of a situation. Now, I'm always very careful to say that we're never here to second guess people. That's not the point of this. We just want to show a visual reference, and then we want to give people ideas that they can use to be safe if they're ever in that same type of a situation. And Lou, thank you very much for being a part of this show. It's always great to have you here on these episodes of Real Encounters.
Well, pleasure being here with you, and I look forward to these. They're, to me, a productive thing to do, and hopefully someone can get something out of what we're talking about that'll make them safer in the future.
I agree 100%. And I just want to, before we go into our show here, I just want to talk a little bit about our motivation. And for people that have heard our podcast series, I just recently did a podcast with Joe Ferrera, who recently retired from Southfield Police Department here in the Detroit, Michigan area. He's a sergeant, or was when he retired, and now he's working with the local sheriff's department. But I wanted to kind of talk about our background and our motivation, because I think it's important that people understand, why are we doing these things? Why are we doing the videos? Why are we doing the articles? Why are we doing the podcast? Why do we teach in the first place? And I'm going to give a real brief example here. Just a couple hours ago, I was at a murder scene. It was a double murder. And we had a woman there who was strangled to death. Her throat was slit. And her 10-year-old son was also murdered. He was choked to death. And I was the guy that had to lift his body up off the bed and lay him down into the body bag. And when people say, why do you teach women's self-defense classes? Why do you teach kids classes, as an example? Well, that's the reason why. And, you know, I've been teaching a long time, and I was exposed to violence at a young age, and I lived a violent lifestyle for a long time. I was a ward of the state. I was in 3 boys' homes. And now, because of my profession, I work with a lot of victims, people who have been victimized, and I hear their stories and the things that they had to go through, and working with a medical examiner, going out to crime scenes where we got folks who are either shot to death or stabbed to death or beat to death or choked to death. I'm always dealing with victims, and I'm very motivated to do whatever I can to empower people so they're not one of those dead bodies that have to get lifted up off the ground. And you know what I'm much more proud of than any of my credentials that I could write down on paper are the people that have been saved by our programs at Live Safe Academy. And I just recently received a message from one of my students, and I'm going to read this message here from her. And this message is... there we go. She just contacted me not but a couple weeks ago, and what she said to me is, if it was not for your training, I would not have survived the attack on my life last weekend. I truly appreciate all you taught me and what you do. And this was on May 23rd of 2015. Today it's June 8th of 2015. And that's the 8th person that I'm aware of that I've kept track of since I formally started keeping track since August of 2014. People that have been saved by our classes, and of course many more people have been saved in the past, but just since I really started keeping track, August 2014, she's number 8. That's what matters to me. And Lou, I know you're very passionate too. I know you've been working with law enforcement and the military for many years. I know you've been working with the public through our school for many years. And you know, I know this issue of keeping people safe is your primary goal too, and why you're willing to take the time to do these podcasts and these videos and to write these articles for people.
Well, Ian, I share a lot of the same things that you've just spoken about. For me, through my martial arts background, military and law enforcement background, I know one thing for sure is that what is important is the training that people receive so that they don't become victims. And we see victims in virtually any place where you want to look. In the military, we may not call them victims, or we may call them casualties. A lot of times people get hurt due to training or a lack of training. In law enforcement, we see the same type of thing happen, to where people get hurt, people get shot, they get killed. And a passion for me is to do whatever I can based on my training and experience to try to minimize these casualties and also the injuries or deaths sustained by people in law enforcement or in the civilian community where I work. There's nothing that is probably the most gratifying thing to happen to any of us that are trainers than when you receive a statement like you just read from a student that says, what you did with me allowed me to win, allowed me to minimize my injuries or get no injuries at all. We're in a people game. Yes, we teach things, but the reality is it's a people game. Nothing is more important to us, and I know you share this through our conversations, that when we're training people, that they are able to get the best that we can give them to make it easier for them to win the fights that they get into. So they are not being picked up and taken to a coroner's office, that they don't sustain injuries that sometimes are lifelong injuries that will be with them forever and change their life. So, the passion for me has always been the people that I deal with. In my law enforcement career, you're working around guys sometimes for many, many years. You get very close to people. And the passion for me there was to do my very best to never have to go to a scene and see them lying on the ground bleeding to death or them actually being dead because of something that happens there. So my effort in this, to me, is it's really not the important thing. The important thing is what someone can get out of it. I'm willing to go to any length I have to be able to share information with people. That's why we're here today doing this, is to share so that maybe somewhere down the road someone reaps a benefit from it.
Absolutely. And let's talk about this particular encounter that we just saw in the video. And let's talk about some ways that people could, number one, avoid that type of situation if they get caught in that situation, how not to be there in the first place. But then also, if they do get caught in the situation, I misspoke there a second ago. If they do get caught in the situation, what are some effective ways that they can respond?
Sure. Well, when I looked at the totality of what happened there, the one thing that always not only came to mind viewing that, but something that I always advise people is that the best thing to do is stay away from those environments. I know a lot of people use these machines to get their cash, to have pocket money. They may get caught where they need a few dollars to do something. My advice is to not use those machines for that purpose. It's a much better and safer thing to do in going into a bank. We all know kind of how much money we need to generally have on us during the course of a day, and withdraw enough money from your account so that you can have immediately available to you at your house the money that you need to have your daily routine taken care of, so that you're not having to make these stops, especially at the time of the day that we observed this lady pulling up into one of these machines in a relatively isolated area. There's not that much that you really need to do at that time of the night to say that you're going to expose yourself to that type of scenario.
That's great. And obviously, it doesn't just apply to the ATM machines, where we get gas, when we get gas. Those are all things that we can apply the exact same principles. Try to wait to get gas until we're in areas that are populated. So not you're the only car there, but there's a lot of other cars that are getting gas too. So you've got witnesses now. When it's well lit, so when it's daytime, and get gas in areas where there's less crime. Don't go into high crime areas to go get your gas, and because that's obviously just going to put you in more risk. So prevention is always the only guarantee of safety and always the best way of being safe. We always want to try to avoid altercations before they happen by making smart choices that keep us out of danger in the first place.
Sure. And to kind of move into another thing that you might want to think about before you pull into one of these scenarios is that if you notice the way that she had to bring her vehicle into the area to get to the machine itself, she's basically in a channelized environment. And what we mean by that is that she is forced by the mere way that that place is organized to be used, to have to drive into a place that limits her ability to maneuver. It brings her to a place to where on the right or left of her, there's no way to take any evasive action to drive away. Yes, you have, the ability to drive forward, but being channelized really means to be brought into an area where you're less favored than someone who may be trying to do you harm. In the military context, we try to avoid being in low ground when there's areas on either side of us that people can occupy to make it very difficult for us to maneuver. A very easy way to get ambushed. This, in essence, was basically an ambush because she channelized her vehicle and herself into an area that restricted her ability to maneuver.
So when we're going to choose to go to that ATM machine, or again, this can apply to any other type of situation where we're conducting business, like at a gas pump, we want to try to choose an environment that gives us more awareness of our surroundings and gives us more mobility also, so we're not trapped and where we have a limited perspective on what's going on around us.
Absolutely. And I can add another incident or series of incidents that actually happened when I was still working. And it wasn't at ATMs, but it was in drive-throughs at the fast food places. We had a series of armed robberies on persons to where they would drive in to make their order, and while they're waiting at the window, the bad guys did exactly what this bad guy did in this scenario. Just come in a blind spot, walk right up to the door, screw a gun into their rear, and demand all their money and purse or whatever else they had there that they wanted. And they were gone before anybody could do anything to them. And again, it's a channelization. It doesn't take you but a couple, maybe another minute or two to get out of your car, walk in the place. You're in a more open environment to where you can maneuver if something goes wrong, but you don't set yourself up in an area where it's easy to be taken.
We always want to try to think strategically so that we try to position ourselves in our environment so we're less likely to get caught off guard and we have more time to react if bad things happen, because the more time you have to react, the better chance you have of an effective response. But of course, you can't react to anything if you're not aware of it happening. Recognition is always the prerequisite to response. So if we put ourselves into environments where we get caught off guard, then we're going to be in situations that we are going to be stuck in. But maybe if we had more awareness, we could have avoided, or at least we wouldn't be caught off guard. We could be prepared.
Absolutely. If we push forward a little bit into the incident, given all of what we said, that obviously wasn't done here. So we have to kind of pick it up from the point where a decision was made to drive into this channelized area to do business. Well, one of the things that I immediately noticed was that throughout the entire time, she still had her seatbelt on as she was conducting her business there. Now, this goes back to the way that we used to make traffic stops, in that one of the things that we always made sure that happened was our seatbelts were completely out of the way so we wouldn't get tangled up in it before the vehicle actually came to a stop behind the violators. And we do this so that we don't get caught in a scenario where we have to move, but then all of a sudden we're kind of married to the seat via the seat belt. So if you're in an area where you don't need a seat belt on where you are because you're not driving, it's perfectly legal to take it off, and it gives you more freedom of movement more rapidly. There's no reason to have yourself sealed into your seat via that belt. We would advise to take it off. And one of the things that I know we had discussed off camera is the fact that being inside that car, conducting the business, reaching out and having to push the buttons and all the things you got to do to get your money, you're now in a position to where you're not only channelized, not only married to the seat, but now you've basically cut yourself off from the environment in which you're operating in. And what that boils down to is that your situational awareness goes down to almost zero, because the only thing that you're focused on at that point is what you're doing with that machine. So that blind spots all around you can't be observed. You can't really say that you can use rapid head movement, eye movement to scan the area. All the things that we teach people to do about staying aware of their environment go right out the window, because the only thought process is, I'm here to get my money, I want to get my money and be on my way, as opposed to understanding that you've now entered a place. It's kind of like, swimming in the water where there's a possibility of sharks, and you got some guy throwing shark bait out in the water. Well, you're just waiting to get taken by a shark. And that's the same type of thing that's happening here. You're getting a commodity that someone potentially wants, and you now have cut yourself off completely from seeing that environment.
My students have heard me say a lot that in a dangerous situation, our number one job is to reduce the number of problems that we have to deal with. But the flip end of that is that we also want to increase the potential options that we have to respond. So as an example, if you were at a parking structure, rather than walk down the staircase where you're isolated and where you're confined, walk down the main ramp where all the cars are driving back and forth, because now you have an open area. There's probably other people there because they're using the parking structure too. And you're not trapped and confined. If you have to quickly move, you have the ability to do that. So the idea here is that we always want to maximize our options. And if you're trapped in that car with that seatbelt on, well, what are you going to do when they walk up on you and put that gun in your face? Once they get the drop on you, you haven't left yourself with any options at that point. So what can you do other than comply or fight back at a severe disadvantage?
Oh, exactly. Well, one of the things or options that you may have based upon the way that particular drive-through is made is to actually get out of the car, as opposed to sitting in the car doing the transaction. You're not making it any slower, you're not making it any faster, but what you are doing by getting out of the car is, once again, opening up more of the environment for your view. It allows you to do the transaction just as fast. In this case, this guy just literally walked up from behind a vehicle, and that's something that would be incredibly difficult to see because your head's not in a position to be able to have peripheral vision to that degree. You're intent on the screen. At least if you're out of the vehicle, you have the ability to move your head back and forth and do something other than just stare at that one thing that's in front of your line of sight. And at the minimum, if there's someone approaching you that you just get that vibe, you just, get that gut feeling that something bad is about to happen here, at least if nothing else, you can try to vacate the area as fast as you can, as opposed to being trapped in that vehicle.
Now, I think we covered everything about the prevention aspect of it. And again, prevention is always the most important aspect of safety and the only guarantee of success. We always want to be aware of our surroundings, make smart choices that keep us out of danger before danger happens. But what about that situation now where we're going to fight back? Well, would it be safe to say, Lou, your opinion, and we can only speculate here, but there really wasn't a reasonable chance of success for her fighting back in that scenario unless she was armed with a gun. Now, being armed with a gun is not the end of the equation. There's still a lot involved here. But if she didn't at least have that basic ability to respond, there probably was no other alternative that would have had a reasonable chance of success. Do you think that's a fair statement based on what we saw?
No, absolutely. You got to look at also the individual and their, let's say, their will to want to fight, their maybe technical knowledge of how to fight. All of this is going to factor in, but I didn't see any opportunity based on her to where she would be able to have fought this guy in the initial stage of of that confrontation. You're at a point where, every advantage is to your opponent, and the probability of success of anything you try is going to just lead to you getting shot or killed. So I completely agree with what you just said.
And we're not saying, and I'm always very careful to say that we're not saying everybody should be armed. That's a very personal choice. But we just want people to be honest that if they have the ability to be armed, why aren't they? Because there are situations that you can end up in where you can't successfully fight back without a gun, or at least the probability of you being successful is very limited. This case that I was just at a couple hours ago is going to be a very high profile case. It's already on the news. But just the day before that, Sunday, this is Monday, so yeah, just yesterday, there was another high profile case of a guy who got shot at a Wendy's. He had his son with him. He was in the car. And I don't know that all these details are in the news, but one of my law enforcement friends had contacted me, and he had given me some details about it. And apparently what had happened was he showed them the gun, the criminals that were doing the armed robbery. The victim showed them a gun to scare them off. That was his intention. Well, it didn't scare him off. As soon as they saw the gun, they immediately shot him and killed him right there. And they also shot his son. His son took a shot in the hand. If I understood correctly, whatever finger or in the thumb he got shot, he lost that appendage. But and by the way, my partner picked him up. I just talked to my partner this morning where we were at the medical examiners, and he said, yeah, I was the one who picked him up. But the point is that just having a gun is not enough, right? There's tactics involved. There's mindset involved. There's circumstances involved. So we're not saying everybody should be armed, personal choice. And we're not saying that if you have a gun, that means you get the win. But if you don't have that basic ability to fight back, you're putting yourself into a situation where you may not have a functional option depending on the situation that you end up in. So we're just trying to give people that motivation to really think about that decision. And then if you do choose to be armed, that you really take the necessary steps to be safe, effective, and responsible with that gun. Because the gun by itself is not the solution. It's only the opportunity, but you have to be able to take that opportunity and turn it into something that's going to be truly effective and give you the best possible chance.
Well, that's a perfect assessment of the whole issue of being armed. And there's really nothing I'd add to that, except that we would say if you do intend to be armed, the accessibility to that firearm is going to be critical at the moment of truth when you really need it. So what do we mean by that? Well, in this case, we're dealing with the female, and let's say hypothetically she was armed. Many females rely on off-body carry of that firearm, meaning they have it in a purse or some other thing that they hold in hand in order to have their firearm with them. And in many circumstances or scenarios, that may be a viable option, and it may work out just as well as having it on your person. However, if for some reason you're separated from it, in the case where the guy screws a gun in your rear and says, get out of the car, well, you may not have any opportunity to reach across the street, across the seat, pluck your firearm out of your purse and get it into the fight. So you may have a gun, you may have the weapon within close proximity, but it still may do you absolutely no good. And a lot of times this is just simply because females and maybe the way they're dressed on that particular day don't allow them to have that weapon on their person. So, having it nearby may work in some scenarios, some it may not. In this case, the only way that firearm could have been of value to her was it had to be on the body, and it also had to be in a place that would have immediate accessibility and rapidly be able to deploy it with the minimum of effort, minimum of body movement, so that it could get into the fight quickly.
Now we're trying to keep these wrapped up into 10 minutes because you and I could go on these subjects for a very long time because there's so many important things that we can really bring out of these examples. But we want to make sure that we're keeping this into a digestible period of time. let's go into that fight scenario. Let's put aside the psychology of it. Let's say that she was psychologically prepared to fight. Let's say that she had set herself up in such a way that she could rapidly and accurately deploy that gun if she needed to. Let's talk about tactics. He still got the drop on her. So, she's still trapped in that car. He's standing there. He's mobile. She's not. Had she drawn her gun at that point, because she was pinned right up against that machine, I think it's safe to say that probably not going to be a high probability of success there. So what could have she done in that situation if she had the ability to fight back, but what is that, that kind of disadvantage? What would have been her best option if fighting back was what she had chosen to do?
Sure. And I think this case is probably an easy one to talk about, because this guy that was robbing her, he wasn't too bright. If you think back of what he did as she exited her vehicle, this guy literally walked behind the machine, completely out of sight. Now, she would have an option, being armed at that point, to quickly run from the scene, or she could have then immediately be able to set up a scenario to where draw your weapon, and as soon as he became visible, open fire on him. Or if that didn't happen, if for some reason it got deeper into it, if he was unaware of her being armed, she could have actually had the weapon in her hand, concealed from his view, and at the moment where it would be the most opportune, when he's distracted or when his eyes are off her, immediately engage him. And that would be an engagement that would probably be somewhere around 2 feet, maybe 3 feet as a maximum. And the probability of success there when you initiate a fight is very, very high. Many officers in the field get killed in that exact scenario because the suspect is so close that they don't really have to be good at shooting to be able to register an immediate headshot or place the bullet somewhere other than in the vest that allows them to get an advantage in the fight. So, if I had to sum it up, if she was armed, 2 opportunities she had, she could have immediately moved to the front of her vehicle, using it for cover, drawing her weapon, and then setting up to engage him if necessary, if he didn't run away at that point. Or at the last moment when they were in very close proximity, that would be the point at which he'd probably have the most advantage of using that firearm.
Yeah, a real nightmare scenario. If you're responsible for protecting people, I provide armed protection of folks who are in danger sometimes. And what will happen is we sometimes have to have that person in the same room with a potential threat, because either it's a hospice nurse going to a family where maybe they've been violent, but she's still there to deal with the family. So we're there, she's still there to deal with the patient. So we're there to deal with the family. Or maybe you have a situation where a female is being going through the divorce process with a husband that's been abusive, but they still have to have that physical contact because they have to divide property, exchange property, whatever. And there you are, and you're the person who's supposed to protect them. And it's a real nightmare scenario that they could just draw their gun and have it in somebody's face that fast. Well, that goes both ways. If you're that person that you got to defend yourself from that criminal where your life is legitimately in danger, your ability to draw that gun and get shots on target very fast is a very difficult thing for anybody to deal with, particularly if you're talented at it. But the other thing is, fighting tactics are always heavily dependent on initiative. Criminals are always trying to catch people off guard. And because they're the ones who initiate the encounters, if you do get caught off guard, well, that's going to be their successful tactic. But then our tactic is to get the initiative back. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. The ways that you just talked about are great examples, but know in your mind that once they've caught you off guard, your job now is to try to find a way to take the initiative back and catch them off guard. Whoever catches the other person off guard has the advantage. That's why they caught you off guard in the first place. But depending on the scenario, you also may be able to catch them off guard and use that very same tactic to your advantage.
Yes, I agree with that. And this is the nature of training, because if we can put people in these type of scenarios as part of their training process, it will cause them to possibly think a little bit clearer. If you've walked people through these things prior to it happening to them, they will have a greater probability of success. This is the whole thing we talk about on force training, why it is absolutely imperative that people do that type of training. It's just not enough to go to the range and say that I'm good enough putting holes in pieces of paper. But we've got to marry that skill with the tactics involved with staying alive. I mean, even if all else fails, just a very rapid yell in your eyes shifting from that person behind them saying, don't, something like that, might be that tactical advantage that you get to cause them to kind of get a little shock out of it and even possibly turn their head because they may believe someone is behind them. And then that's where it opens up the door for you to be able to do what you're talking about, gaining the initiative. But if you don't bring people into these environments and teach them these things, the last thing you want to do is be in that scenario and try to come up with solutions that have never been tested or that you've never gone through. This is why we did so much of this type of training in the Marine Corps. This is why we try to get as much of this done in the law enforcement training as possible. And for any of the civilians or concealed carry holders that are out there listening to this, you really, really need to try to get that type of training into the things that you're doing. It's invaluable to be put into these things beforehand so you get a real feel for the time element involved in it, how quickly this stuff develops, and how you're going to respond when you have to actually do this stuff for real.
Absolutely. And Lou, thank you so much for being a part of this new episode of Real Encounters, episode number 8. Always very grateful to have the benefit of your insight because I care so passionately about people's safety. I consider it a real honor to have the opportunity to learn from people that I know are just as dedicated, who are the experts that I want to be someday, right? And that's you and Joe Ferrera and people that have really been out there in the field and have a lot of experience helping other people be safe. Not theory, but real world experience. So thank you so much, viewers. Thank you so much for taking time to watch this episode. Please watch our previous 7 episodes if you haven't seen those already, and we hope you'll continue to watch future episodes. Lou, again, thank you very much. Viewers, have a wonderful day. Be safe.
Would you like to connect with Live Safe Academy, LLC? Would you like to help us spread the word so we can help more people? Go to livesafeacademy.com/connect to join our email list, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook. Get free safety information and learn more about our classes and premium online learning opportunities. Because you have the right to be safe, no one has the right to hurt you, and you are worth protecting.